This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
How the backs there are! He backs it! He kicks it! Oh, the fall from Dees! This is the speed of the culture. 3 bounces down the wing. He keeps going. 4 bounces. Joining the chorus. The Can't Lose Kangas are AFLW premiers.
Hello, welcome back once again to North Pod. It's me, Jason, here to talk about another North Melbourne loss, and a pretty disappointing one, to be honest. I went in not expecting to win, but definitely thinking that we were a chance to win, and that if we played well, we should win. We definitely did not play well, so a wasted opportunity, I think, in more ways than one. We had chances within the game that we wasted. The game itself, I think, was a big chance wasted, and we just didn't stand up far too often throughout the game. Understand that, we're down a few soldiers, but a little bit different to last week. Last week we were down a lot of soldiers. We had a couple come back in, or 3 in fact come back in this week. So, I went in with higher expectations. We certainly had experience come back in, and the Dees just outlasted us, really powered away in that final term to make it a pretty comfortable win for them. Unfortunately for us, that means a disappointing loss. I was watching it with a couple of loyal North Pod listeners, so Glenn and Molly, thanks for watching along throughout that miserable game. But not a lot of positives to come from it. There are a couple for sure, but disappointing game, and I guess follows up a bit of a disappointing patch the last 3 or 4 weeks. So let's try and unpack it. Let's try and unwind and figure out where it's all gone wrong as we head to Roo Review. All right, team selections, where I generally like to start. And like I mentioned, had 3 players come back in, 2 of them very experienced. And I think Chom, we could say, is an established player at this point. So Comben, Darling and Luke Parker all returned from injuries. And unfortunately, we had LDU and Larkey pick up some injuries last week. LDU obviously with the concussion, so I'd expect him for it to just be the 1 week. Larkey had a knee injury, and so I'm not too sure around, it certainly wasn't going to be a long injury, but whether or not it's a 1 or a 2 or a 3, we're not too sure at this point. Zane Dersner was, I suppose, you could say the unlucky one who missed out and who was just omitted. Didn't play a fantastic game last week, so I don't think that was an entirely surprising decision, particularly given we've got some experienced players coming back in, and Bailey Scott was the sub. I think we saw CCJ was named in the squad, ended up being one of the emergencies, and then was pulled out due to sickness. We had Brent Teagle come into the emergency list on the back of that. But I think he's clearly a chance for a call-up in the last month and a half of the season. I expect... Well, maybe expect is strong. I really hope that we do see him get on the park before the year is out, so that we can make at least, that might help us with our decision making. Coming out of contract, he's coming off an Achilles injury. He's a bigger player. Just by virtue of that, it's going to be harder for him to recover. And so I do think it's important that we get a look at him before the year's up. With Larkey being out, it was an opportunity for that, but I think we kind of chose to go, not smaller, but I guess we chose to be a bit more consistent with our forward line. We went with Maley and Darling as though the 2 talls down there, and Xerri can kind of play a 3rd tall sort of like role, and then obviously we've got the smalls around them. So that's what we went with in the end. CCJ didn't get the call up. And I think in general, though, we went with a pretty tall defence. We saw in the second half, Will Dawson actually got swung forward to make it a 3 tall forward line, just to get some height out of that back line. And I think, the Dees aren't a super tall forward line. Van Rooyen's kind of their one focal point up forward in terms of a marking tool, and he's not a super tall player. He plays tall, but he'd be mid-190s, I think. He's not a big 200-centimetre bloke. They don't have another outlet there at the moment. That Ben Brown's retired. They're not playing Tom McDonald 4 at the moment with Stephen May out. So, they were pretty small. We went pretty tall, and I think that probably is reflected in the fact that we did make the sub as the game went on. But, the team balance is always going to be a bit wonky when you've got injuries. You're trying to figure out what your best 23 is and also what the balance of that looks like. So, all of that being said, we go into the game. Like I said, I was feeling pretty optimistic, which I guess in another way makes me nervous, because going into games with expectation is always dangerous for North Melbourne fans. At the moment, I certainly go into most games with pretty low expectations, but we beat Melbourne earlier in the year. We've been playing some good footy, not great footy the last couple of weeks, but prior to that we've been in some good form, and the Dees certainly have not. So I thought we were a chance, and I thought it was an opportunity for us to climb the ladder. Like I mentioned that during last week, we had the opportunity to climb 2 spots. And so I was really hoping that we were going to come out all guns blazing and essentially take the game where we left off when we played Melbourne last. But unfortunately, I guess we did jump out of the blocks. We won some centre clearances, we got some inside 50s, and just some poor execution with our kicking early on meant that some of those chances went begging. We had Jacob Stanley miss an opportunity. We saw Paul Curtis miss an opportunity. And, that's a common theme for us, is that often we create these opportunities but aren't able to, I guess, be efficient with them and take full advantage of them. That was definitely prevalent in this game early on. I thought Colby McKerch was doing some really good penetrating kicking early on. He essentially had the ball on a string early on. He had lots of touches, was kicking it really well, and I thought creating some really good opportunities for us. We saw a really nice tackle from Paul Curtis, which gave Cooper Harvey opportunity, and he hit the post, another wasted opportunity. And it's small margins, but at the end of the day, the momentum was going our way early on, and we ended it with 2 points. So unfortunately, then the momentum swings, and Melbourne got some opportunities. We saw Will Phillips match up on Pickett and essentially just follow him around for the entire half. Obviously, Pickett spent some time in the midfield, but often he'd go into the midfield, do the centre clearance, and then he'd swap and head forward and take WillPhil deep, which certainly made WillPhil pretty uncomfortable. There was several moments in that first half where he was one-on-one with Pickett. It was a clear, targeted tagging kind of role, and I think Melbourne's response was really smart. They took WillPhil to a one-out spot where he was always going to be uncomfortable. Pickett really toyed with him and took a mark early on and kicked a goal, and you kind of thought, is this matchup going to work for us, particularly when Pickett goes forward. There were a couple of other opportunities, more in the second quarter, where Pickett took a couple of marks, or there was one free kick that he won, but he wasn't able to be effective with those opportunities. I think it was one out in the full and one behind. So anyway, it was a really, really interesting matchup, and it was great to see, I guess, the cat and mouse between the coaches with, Clarko deciding that we're going to tag Pickett as opposed to an Oliver or a Petrarca, and then Simon Goodwin saying, all right, well, good luck playing fullback with one of your smaller midfielders. Unfortunately, the first half, the first quarter, was just a lot of momentum swings, and Melbourne, I thought, did a pretty good job of taking advantage of their momentum. They had less of the momentum, but took more from that. We saw another chaos ball go forward where Bailey Fritsch kicks a goal. And like I said, they took their opportunities where we didn't. I thought then we did solidify after that shaky start. We saw Jack Daly and Cooper Harvey goal after some really nice Colby McKercher distribution in that opening quarter. And we sort of got ourselves back into the game at that point, I think. We were lucky to get Paul Curtis. I thought he juggled the mark, but he missed the goal anyway. But it's pretty uncommon that we're getting sort of lucky with that kind of decision in our forward line, and you've really got to get the most value for money when that kind of thing's happening. Paul Curtis did end up kicking one on the siren to put us in front at quarter time. We got some reward, at least, for all of our effort in the first quarter, but I definitely think we should have been further in front going into quarter time. It was wasteful by us for the most part that we weren't. Another example of that, Luke Parker just, I guess, took a backward step or didn't quite commit to running backwards with the flight and taking a mark. That meant that he spilt it, and it was in the corridor, so it was in a really dangerous spot. It was a nice kick to him. I wish I could remember who kicked it to him, but it was a nice kick. It was going to open up the ground. He spills the mark, and Melbourne transition, get an inside 50. Fortunately for us, no, actually they did. Melksham kicked a goal from that. There were a couple of times where Melbourne didn't finish their work, but Melksham did kick one of his 5 goals on the back of that turnover. So that's nothing new to us. We know that we're often turning it over in dangerous spots, but what you'd like to see is it being those younger players learning, as opposed to Luke Parker, who It was a little bit uncharacteristic from him, I thought. I'm not too sure. His body work, I guess, looked a bit awkward. He didn't quite commit with his body and ended up trying to take it one-handed and spilt it, like I said. So the first half was a bit of a tussle. We definitely, I think, had more of the play but weren't able to take our opportunities and went into the quarter-time break with a bit of a slender lead. And I thought we came out of the quarter-time break again. We were tackling really hard. There was a couple of group tackles, one a holding the ball call. It looked really, really positive. Jack Darling was marking well up the ground and inside 50 as well. He took a couple of marks early on in the quarter. It looked as though Paul Curtis might have picked up an injury. He played out the game, so I guess it wasn't a major concern, but at one point I think he got his leg trapped under someone else and looked a bit ginger. And then there was just, I thought we started well, but then we let Melbourne get the momentum, and they had a lot of repeat entries. The Dees just kept going forward and getting one-on-one or even number opportunities in our back line. And I thought really exposed us. We were probably, it's not that we were too tall, I just thought we were too slow and we weren't able to defend the ball effectively enough. So Melbourne were getting a lot of even number or just flat out really nice opportunities to mark it inside 50. Melksham was one of those that was doing some damage. And like I mentioned, Kasai Pickett, if he was able to kick straight, would have had 3 up to half time because he was really taking WillPhil to the cleaners as a full forward. And WillPhil was absolutely battling his heart out, but he's not a full back. So that was a really interesting matchup, and we were a bit fortunate that Kasai Pickett wasn't quite as efficient as the rest of his teammates. I thought eventually, though, the Dees did break through and kick a couple of goals there. Caleb Daniel misses a kick over the back that would have had us, lining up maybe 40 metres out. He just needed to put it a little bit further at the back, and the D just opened the door so a Dees defender could come in and spoil a ball. It's those things where you just go, we're so close, but we're just not quite skillful and strong enough to, we got the ball all the way there, and that final kick misses by, maybe a metre or two. If it was just a metre or two further out the back, it's an easy, relatively uncontested mark, and we're lining up 35 metres out from goal. It kind of sums up where we're at, I think, and I don't think Caleb Daniel had a great game. It wasn't a bad game by any stretch, but he wasn't able to get that penetration effectively, I suppose. And McKercher, as the game went on, I thought also his impact wavered. Certainly a really impactful first quarter, but I think Melbourne adjusted to him and actually put some time and work into, not allowing him as much space as he had in that first quarter. I thought WillPhil, like I mentioned, he was in that tussle with Pickett. I thought he had a really, really good effort at half forward. Didn't quite lay a tackle, but put some immense pressure on, resulted in a Paul Curtis mark. Then, I don't know if it was as a result of him being somewhat injured or if he's miskicked it, but he didn't make the distance. There was, again, just a waste opportunity from a really hardcore play from WillPhil. That's the kind of stuff that you want to see rewarded when players put their bodies on the line and attack the footy with that ferocity. Just a lot of missed chances and opportunities go begging. The Dees did take the lead in this quarter and went to half-time with a lead. We were fortunate it wasn't more. Jai Simpkin gave away a pretty undisciplined 50-metre penalty late in the quarter. We know red time goals are... we're pretty good at conceding them, and Jai Simpkin did his best. That was poor leadership from him. He's prone to that. He hasn't done much of that this year, but I've certainly seen that from him the past couple of years. He's prone to just not being able to keep his emotions in check and giving a player a push or just taking things a step too far, and he did that late in this quarter. It was a 50-metre penalty, but fortunately Melbourne weren't able to kick a goal from that. And like I said, we're going to halftime, definitely in the game, but not looking like we're not playing well at all, not finishing our work. And I certainly went in not feeling good about the match. We started the third quarter the exact same way that we ended the second. Paul Curtis wasted another opportunity, kicked it out of the full. Xerri missed an opportunity he should have taken. It was just so many chances. And you look at the final score, it was 12-11. I didn't actually touch on the score yet. It was Melbourne 18-11, 119 to North Melbourne 12-11, 83. So 12-11, is not good, but it's not ridiculous. It's not awful. But when you add in the out on the full and the kicks that didn't even make the distance, it really paints a picture of just complete inefficiency with our opportunities that we created. And like I said, this continued. I thought really a backbreaker in this quarter. I thought that the matchup between Gawn and Xerri was a really interesting one. It was always going to be an interesting one, given obviously they're two of the best ruckmen in the competition. And earlier in the season, we saw Xerri absolutely get the upper hand and beat Gawn. So Gawn, had a bit of a point to prove. I really enjoyed their tussle. I'll talk in a bit more detail about that tussle later on. But Gawn got a off-the-ball free kick that I think is just absolutely not there. Xerri essentially was just trying to gently push Gawn, into the direction that he wanted. There was no hard bump, and Gawn went down like he'd been absolutely shot. Just, for me, it wasn't a free kick. Gawn then goes back and kicks the goal from 50 metres out close to the boundary. It was a really nice kick, but that's a backbreaker. You're putting in heaps of effort, you're doing a lot of hard work, and then you essentially give away a freebie, and then the Dees capitalise with, what that would probably be a 15 to 20% kick, I reckon, for Max Gawn, but he's absolutely flushed it. That one hurt. Don't know if it was the next centre clearance, but it was certainly soon afterwards. It looked like we were going to be moving forward with the clearance. WillPhil goes for a hand pass over the top. It's intercepted, and on the fast break, Melbourne go for another mark inside 50. Fritsch kicked one soon after from a McKercher turnover, and it was actually Melbourne kicking 5 goals in a row at this point. Although it had been slow going, it had sort of started early in the second quarter and taken them all the way through to middle of the third quarter. They kicked 5 in a row, and we've seen North Melbourne give up these consecutive goals that really break our backs. I guess 5 goals is probably the upper limit of what you'd want. But it didn't feel like a 5-goal barrage just because it was so spaced out. Fortunately, then, we had Cam Xerri with this third quarter cameo. He won a high tackle. He kicks a goal from that. Xerri again takes a mark, kicks his third goal in that third quarter. And I just thought it was a really important stand-up moment for him. He'd had a tough first half, hadn't found much of the footy. He might have had 2 touches, maybe 3 in the first half. But like I said, kicked 3 goals and really kept us in the game in the third quarter. It looked like it was about to really swing Melbourne's way, and Cam took a couple of really important marks, put his head over the footy and won some free kicks, and unfortunately was able to finish his work unlike he did earlier on in the game. So 3 really important goals. We saw also during this third quarter that Will Dawson went forward. Finbar Maley got subbed out, so essentially we decided to go smaller in defence, and we sent Will Dawson up forward to play a third tall. Didn't make much of an impact forward, but I think it was, I like the experimentation and giving him some exposure, even though I think long-term I really like him as a defender. He had some really nice moments as a defender, taking some marks and being a really strong body in this game. I think it's great that you've got this flexibility that you can, either him or Chom can go forward in a moment like this. I mean, even Toby Pink, who has been having a good season, his last few weeks have not been good. Last year we saw him play that kind of decoy forward role as well, so he does have some of that flexibility as well. In any case, we saw some changes. I also saw WillPhil, we dropped the tag on Kasai Pickett. We just said, WillPhil, you go be a midfielder. You've still got to play, but whether that's, Petrarca now or Sparrow, like one or the other, Clayton Oliver, you're playing on someone else. You don't need to worry about Kasai Pickett the way that you were. I thought that opened up a few things for WillPhil in his game. He had a really nice clearance game, I thought. But this is where that third quarter, it's often the one that decides the game, because the coaches will make some changes, and then it's just, do those changes, or how do those changes impact what happens out in the field in that third quarter. Late in the quarter, we saw a deliberate or an insufficient intent go against Riley Hardiman. I thought that was pretty rough for me. It was a great marking contest spoil that Hardiman was able to create. He then gathers possession near the point post, and I think, to be honest, his momentum took him out his bounds. This is where I think the rules of our game kind of let us down a little bit, because the rules just expect him to pretend to want to keep it inside the lines. And I think in reality, he just didn't quite do a good enough job of pretending, even though there are so many other players in that exact same situation do the same thing, but disguise it better. For me, that's something that doesn't sit great with me, because I think ultimately we're asking umpires to make a judgment on what players are thinking, and that's a really, really hard thing to do. Nothing new to the game. We've had, before insufficient intent, it was deliberate out of bounds. Both of them, require the umpire to make a judgment about intent. But for me, it's just a sort of decision that I go, it's made a massive difference to the scoreline. It's an easy goal that the Dees were able to kick. And I thought in general the umpiring was a little bit frustrating. It was Van Rooyen that kicked that goal. I think that was his only goal, so it brings him into the game after I thought Will Dawson and at times Logan Comben had done a pretty good job on him. Yeah, it was a frustrating game from the umpires. You could tell that the North Melbourne fans were certainly feeling that way. I'm not an umpire basher. They're out there trying their best, but there was some puzzling decisions that I thought really cost us, and I guess it goes back to that efficiency thing. Like the Dees were able to take those opportunities that the umpires gave, which happens in every game, and actually execute. Whereas when it did go our way, like for example the Paul Curtis one, we weren't able to to finish our work. So we go into three-quarter time, and we're not in a great spot. We're definitely still in the game. Unfortunately, then Melbourne really just blew us out of the water, to be honest. Melksham kicks 2 goals to start the quarter. Tholstrup gets one out the back, and for me, it was game over at that point. We just missed too many opportunities. Toby Pink was looking really nervous on Melksham. Any time he was one-on-one with a high ball, Melksham, just a smarter player, worked him under the ball or read the footy better and was able to take some really nice marks. Jack Darling and Cooper Harvey kept us in it. They kicked a couple of nice goals, and in theory we were still in the game. I think we were 4 or 5 goals down with 12 minutes left, so you're definitely still in the game at that point, but it never really felt like we were going to challenge. Xerri, I guess the big moment in the last quarter was Xerri accidentally knocking out Sparrow. It was a ruck contest, or I don't know if it was a boundary throw-in or a toss-up, but there was the tap from Gawn and Xerri. Xerri then went to follow it up. Sparrow, I guess, took possession, and then Sherry's arm, I guess, goes for a tackle, but he's already half of the way past Sparrow. It ends up collecting him, in the face or the head, and unfortunately Sparrow was down for the count before he even hit the ground. It was one of those ones that looks sickening, not because of the hit itself, but because of the reaction from the player. There was definitely some remonstrating from Gawn and the other Melbourne players, but I think you could see that Xerri had absolutely no intent to hurt Sparrow. For me, it was accidental, and so it's a tough one because obviously Sparrow's really hurt. He had to get taken off on the stretcher, but no intent from me from Xerri. He looked bemused that the Melbourne players are going at him. I understand that you want to support your player, but accidents happen. I don't think Xerri did anything wrong. I don't think that he really could have done anything else. If he doesn't try to lay a hand on Sparrow, he'll be not doing his job at that following up at that stoppage. So it's unfortunate. We hate seeing players knocked out. And certainly it's a sickening way for that to happen. But I thought it was a bit unfortunate that Xerri was, I guess, being blamed for that. For me, that was just a footballing accident. That took a good 5 or 6 minutes for that to play out, which always makes the quarter drag, particularly when you're just waiting for the game to be over. Really, it was maybe 6 or 7 minutes left when that happened, and again, the game was done. It was just play it out kind of stuff. It was really nice to see Cooper Harvey get involved late in the game. He was able to kick a couple of goals. I think he kicked our last 3 to end the game with 4 goals. I'll touch on him shortly. But yeah, just unfortunately, there was a moment where Dylan Stevens it was a half tackle on Petrarca. He was actually able to then break that tackle and kick a goal. And I think that summed up the game in a lot of ways for us, where he'd done the hard work. He'd corralled Petrarca. He'd tackled him for nearly long enough, and then the shrug of the hips meant that he was able to then kick the goal pretty easily. But it was 90% of the job was done, and he just wasn't quite able to do that last 10% and stick the tackle for a little longer. And to be clear, Christian Petrarca through the hips, one of the strongest players. Patrick Dangerfield, Christian Petrarca, they're those absolute bulls that are built with legs like tree trunks. He's a strong player through the hips. He's hard to tackle. But like I said, I thought that Disco had done the hard work, and he just had to finish it a little longer and hold it a little longer. He wasn't able to. Petrarca kicks the goal, and I think that was a really good metaphor for the way that we played this game. We did 90% of it well, or at least adequately, but it was finishing off our work where we really struggled. The next ruck contest I think it was, Xerri laid a really nice tackle on Petrarca, and that allowed Cooper Harvey to kick one of his goals. So it was nice that some of our players played the game out. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, it ended up being a 36-point loss. 36-goal loss would have been truly something. And really we were out of it early on in that last quarter. But yeah, just a really disappointing game in the end. Like I said, because of the expectations, because of the potential coming in, we definitely didn't get out of the game what we were hoping to. Yeah, a frustrating game to watch because so many opportunities created, just wasted that could have, made this a close game come the end of the day. So we end up losing. It's another loss. Tough one because this was such a big game for us. It was an 8-point game, not obviously in terms of finals, but certainly in terms of what we're hoping to achieve this year. And unfortunately, we failed. I think there's no other way of saying that. Sure, we relied on some personnel, but we ultimately failed, and that's a disappointing way to end this game. Story of the game, and I guess I've spoken about it for a fair bit, so I'm not gonna go too long here. It was missed opportunities. I mentioned it before that the 12 goals 11 is one thing, but it was the easy kicks going inside 50 that missed targets and the shots that didn't make the distance when they should have. It's a game where we went back to what we do best, or worst in this case, and that's not take advantage when we have momentum and then leak goals when the momentum swings. I'm sure if you're a North Melbourne fan, and if you're not, I'm not sure why you're listening to the podcast, but I do appreciate it. If you're a North Melbourne fan, you've seen this so much over the last few years. We can do the hard work, we get the ball inside 50, and then we find ways not to score or not to kick goals. That was a good summation of how this game went, which I think makes it an ugly watch, because so often you're watching your team stuff it up when they've done, all the hard work. I think the other element in this is we did lose contested possession by 20. It was 128 to 108. That's a fairly big loss in contested possessions, and I think that did speak to our ability to win it in those important contests and get the ball out to the runners and transition effectively. I thought our tackling was really, really good, generally speaking, but Melbourne was far better at feeding the ball out, getting out in transition, and then getting those one-on-one or even number opportunities in their forward line, whereas we were often kicking it to a congested forward line, or just, even if we weren't, we were missing kicks that we should have hit that would have, given our forwards a way better opportunity. So, I thought the Dees were really good in tight. They've got some really good in tight players with Petrarca, Oliver, Viney, Gawn, even Kasai Pickett, who, I thought drifted in and out of the game, but they've got some great contested players. It's more the outside spread and runners that they maybe lack. But it didn't matter in this game because they didn't need leg speed. They were just able to move the ball quickly and hand pass through our defence and really make us look silly at times, unfortunately. It was just one of those matches where we landed some punches, but ultimately it wasn't enough to make a significant impact on the Dees at any point in time. They just punched back quicker and faster, and I never really felt like we were challenging hard in that second half. It felt like we were hanging in there, but didn't at all feel like we were going to really, take the game by the scruff of the neck and get ourselves back in front, which, is what we had to do ultimately if we were going to compete in this game. So a missed opportunities game in more ways than one. No one player was responsible. It was all over the ground, really. Certainly some players more responsible than others, but it was a team effort in stuffing it up, for want of a better phrase. And like I mentioned a few times, just a really frustrating watch for fans. We're at the G, at the home of football. We're playing on a Sunday afternoon, so there's some, there's opportunities for, there's no senior local football, there's junior local football, but there'd be more eyes on this than I think there would be on a, Saturday twilight, for example, and unfortunately weren't able to get the job done, and a lot of missed opportunities. Shinboner of the week time, and a pretty easy one, this one. I guess there were probably two options. Cam Zerha's third quarter was a really good effort, but it's got to be Cooper Harvey. He's coming in for his second game for the year. He's kicked 4 goals, 13 disposals, 7 marks, involved in 2 other scores. And, I thought really showed that he's got the ability to hit the scoreboard. We've seen him do that at VFL level. I think we've known that he can do this at AFL level. It's been a good 24 months since we've seen him at AFL level, really. I thought it was fantastic that he came in, kicked our last 3 goals of the game, so he didn't give up. You could say they're dead time goals, but I don't think they are for him. He's playing for a contract. He scored 3 of his goals when I think the game was still alive. I'd give you the last one. The game was dead definitely at that point, but I thought it was a really gutsy effort. He took advantage of his opportunities for the most part. There was definitely one early on that I think he should have kicked. I can't remember. That one might have hit the post, I reckon. But, 4 goals, 2. The 7 marks is really impressive. We know he's more of a marking forward. He plays a role offensively quite similar to Paul Curtis. Definitely not as hard a worker defensively as Paul Curtis. Not they're not the same player, but he's similar in that he does play more of a leading smaller player. He can crumb it, but I think he's best on the lead. And we saw that he had a couple of really nice leads into the hole that, where Melbourne's essentially hoping that we're going to kick it there, but they're expecting it to go to one of our taller players. He leads really nice and quick into that hole and creates an uncontested mark inside 50. So for me, in game 5, 7, he hasn't played very many games. It's certainly single digits. for him to come and kick 4 goals in a game where, the ball wasn't coming in very nicely and very often, and in a game where there's a lot of pressure on him because, he would know that he's probably the 21st, 2nd or 3rd selected player, maybe 21st or 22nd, given he wasn't the sub. He's down the pecking order, and when Nick Larkey comes back, there's going to be a conversation around, is it Maley, is it Cooper Harvey that comes out? Like, someone's going to have to fall out of that forward line. So he's really playing for a spot there, and definitely playing for a contract for next year, I thought. A really, really solid effort by Cooper Harvey. I think we're all rooting for him. We all want him to succeed. I still think at this point he's going to have a couple more games like this to convince people to give him another contract. But if he can do this, if he can repeat this and then add some more defensive nous to his game, I think he's every chance. So deserving Shinboner of the week, I think Cooper Harvey, back against the wall kind of stuff. I've also given him 2 votes for that great performance. I just think you can't ignore 4 goals in a losing side with the 7 marks, and the way that he did it wasn't Joe the Gooses out the back. He worked hard for his goals. So I guess moving into the North Podium voting now, Cooper Harvey 2, and then the other person with the 2 votes, Cam Xerri. No one with the 4 and the 3 in this particular game. Just the third quarter and the second half in general from Cam Xerri was really, really, really nice. 3 goals, 13 disposals, 4 marks, 2 goal assists. A lot of that damage done in the third quarter. He nearly dragged us back into the lead. After a quiet first half, I think he had 2 or 3 touches in the first half, but the third quarter, he was fantastic. And I think, on a different day where things go a bit differently, he could have been the game winner for us. Ultimately, obviously, he's not. We lose by 6 goals, but if things had gone differently and we'd found a way to, get back into the contest and kick more goals in that second half, we'd be talking about him as the one that turned the tide. So Cam Xerri also worthy of the 2, and then I think I've got 7 players here that got the 1 vote, so I'll whip through them. Harry Sheasel, just a typical performance from him, 29 disposals, 6 marks, 6 tackles, 4 clearances, 7 score involvements. Played his role, wasn't a standout, good link in the chain often and relatively clean, but not one of his best performances, enough to say that he's played his role, which is what the description for the 1 vote is. Luke Parker, pretty similar, 27 disposals, 4 marks, 6 tackles, 8 clearances, 7 score involvements. Just back to what he does. He hit the contest hard. He provided physicality when required. Like I mentioned, he did have that one moment that he'd like back, but that was a blemish, and you certainly allowed a mistake. So I think you could definitely still, he played his role, or say that he played his role, rather. Colby McKercher, 29 disposals, 544 metres gained. Started like a house on fire, was everywhere, but then quietened down and wasn't quite as influential as the game went on. So probably moved himself down from a 3 or a 2 down to a 1 because of the way that he faded out of the game. Will Phillips is one that, I tossed and turned on whether I give him a vote or not. A really interesting game. 20 disposals, 4 tackles, 8 clearances, which was a game high, a goal assist, 5 inside 50s, and definitely had some mistakes, definitely had some moments where he looked out of his depth. But I think the way that he came back in that second half and really tried his guts out, and the way that he tried his guts out on Pickett the entire time, I thought was really admirable. I definitely think he played his role. So played really tight on Pickett in the first half, was found out a couple of times when they went forward, but was absolutely trying his best and stuck to his player. And then in the second half, when he was freed up to play more of an offensive role, I thought did that really well. Like I said, had the 8 clearances, applied some really important pressure in the front half of the ground and played his heart out, despite some errors. There was definitely some mistakes in his game, but I think played his role, worth the 1 vote for Will Phillips. Jack Darling, 3 goals, 9 disposals, 4 marks, a goal assist. Just made the most of his opportunities, which is more than can be said of lots of others. So wasn't required for ruck duties in this game with Maley doing the backup of Xerri. I think that makes it a bit easier for him because he's just got a consistent role across the day. He's up forward, and if he's not, he's on the bench. And I thought, whilst he only had the 9 touches, the 4 marks were really important. Kicked the 3 goals, definitely played his role for the side. And I think a really important part of his game is that he is just so hard to move in a marking contest. So many of our players get easily nudged under it. He does not. He is really strong through the legs and is able to take that contact and hold his ground. So we saw that a couple of times when he came up the ground. He was able to take a couple of strong marks. So definitely played his role. Finn O'Sullivan, 15 touches, 5 marks, 2 clearances. Just really clean and sharp, does the harder stuff in traffic that McKercher and Caleb Daniel don't in that back line. Just loved his game developmentally. I think he's never really had those super high disposal games, but he definitely, every disposal he has is impactful, and he just creates space for himself. It's a tough comparison, but he has a Pendlebury-like ability just to find space with a couple of subtle movements. I always think he's taking just a fraction too much time, but he makes it work. So another solid game from Finn O'Sullivan. I thought played his role in that halfback/wing role, but a lot of that was off halfback. And then finally, Will Dawson, 7 disposals, 7 marks, 2 of those contested, 3 tackles. When he was in the back half, I thought he played his role beautifully, marked strongly, and then was swung forward to match up a little bit differently in the second half when Maley was subbed out. I don't know that he showed a lot in that forward, half an hour or 40 minutes that he played, but defensively, definitely another promising game. Not as good and as flashy as the other week, but still his marking was really strong. A couple of his marks were fantastic, and he's now sort of started to fill out that frame. We've always known he's got a massive frame. I think the last 18 months or so he's put on a lot of strength and weight through that frame, and he's able to, now he actually looks like a beast out there. So 1 vote for Dawson. I'll go over those votes again. 2 votes for Cooper Harvey and Cam Xerri. 1 vote for Sheasel, Parker, McKercher, Phillips, Darling, O'Sullivan, and Will Dawson. In terms of what the current North Podium standings look like as a result of that, Xerri and Sheasel now equal top on 20 votes. Xerri didn't get a vote in this particular game. Sheasel got the 1, so equal top on 20. And then we've got an equal second with LDU and Luke Parker on 16 each. So then I guess in theory we've got third Paul Curtis on 14. Behind them, McKercher and Powell 13, Larkey and Xerri 12, McDonald 11, and Jai Simpkin 10. That's what the top of the North Podium looks like. We've got 6 games left, so still plenty of opportunity for that group that I've just mentioned there to move around. But yeah, it's tight up the top, but Xerri and Sheasel on 20 each, it's going to be tough for someone to beat those two, I think. If anyone can, it's probably LDU, because he does play some special games of football, but he's going to have to return from injury and concussion to do that. So let's hope for everyone's sake that that's what happens. As always, I'll just take this quick opportunity to thank everyone for their support of the show. I really appreciate it. So if you could share the show with any other North Melbourne fans, that I would really appreciate it. You can subscribe on your chosen podcast service, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. And you can find me on social media at NorthPodShow. Kanga clipboard time. I mentioned it throughout the episode. The Xerri and Gawn contest is one that I did want to spend just a little bit more time on. It looked to me like Gawn really tried to deny Xerri access to the footy in those ruck contests, which is often what Xerri's tactic is when he's, I guess, becoming aggressive with the other ruckman. I think it was pretty effective. I even think there were a couple of contests where, Gawn blocked Xerri's access and then didn't get back to the footy himself, in which case it should have been a free kick. It's one of those ones where I think the umpire says in his mind that both players are wrestling and it's not one shepherding the other. But I think, like I mentioned, there was a couple that were, for me, clear-cut, should have been free kicks to Xerri. It's fine. That's what happens. It's a really hard game to umpire, but I thought it was interesting that that was Gawn's tactic, essentially just to play Xerri on Xerri and try his own tactic against him. It was relatively effective. I think Gawn definitely took the chocolates, but it wasn't a demolition job. There was a lot of learning to come out of this from Big X. I think he'll get more support from the umpires against other ruckmen. Gawn is a multiple All-Australian, a real star of the game. He's going to get 50-50 calls go his way. It's just human nature. But, I do think against other rucks, we'll see free kicks given to Xerri if other teams try to apply that same tactic and do so illegally, like I think Gawn did a couple of times. I think Gawn would say that Xerri, was a bit physical with him as well, and that's definitely true. But it was a really good tussle. I think it's a tough one because I know the storyline or the vibes coming out of this are going to be, Gawn's reasserted himself as the best ruckman. But, if you think back to the game earlier in the year, I think Xerri definitely beat Gawn better in that game than Gawn beat Xerri in this game. So, a bit of context is important. I still think that Xerri, he's been a little bit quiet the last few weeks. His form has dropped a little bit, but I think Gawn was, I thought Gawn played a really smart game on Xerri. It was just a great battle to watch. If you're a neutral, that's the kind of ruck contest that I would like to see. Just a couple of absolute brutes going at it, and they did that all game. It was really good to watch. I guess the hit on Sparrow from Xerri is going to be a really interesting one to see how the MRO comes down on that. I'm recording this Sunday evening, so obviously no news from me yet from the MRO, but I've got a bad feeling that he's going to be missing a game or two. I know that the grading's not going to be ridiculous because in no way could that be an intentional hit. I hope that what the tribunal decides is that that's not a reportable offence and therefore nothing to see here. I do think it's a bit challenging though, because a swinging arm, again, I think he's going for a tackle, but I think it's very easy to interpret that as a swinging arm, and in that case, that can be a reckless act, which is one of the gradings that you can get from the MRO. So that's going to be really interesting. It's going to be tough if he misses football. We don't really have a backup senior, full-time ruckman. Taylor Goad's in the VFL, but he's not ready. CCJ, in theory, he could come in and ruck, but I don't think he's a full-time ruck. I think I don't know that he's going to be able to come back in having played no AFL in the best part of 2 years and then ruck 75-80% of a game. So whether or not that means that Maley keeps his spot and plays a lot of ruck, or we share duties between Maley and Darling and then maybe someone else like Teakle, I'm not too sure, but yeah, that's going to be tough if he does miss football. I really hope that he doesn't. I don't think that act was in any way or any different from an accident, but we know that sometimes the way that the MRO sees these things is not necessarily logic. So we're gonna have to see how that plays out. The second note here on my notepad, and it's a tough one. I really think our defence is missing Luke McDonald. The past couple of weeks, it's looked a lot more disorganised. It's looked like we don't necessarily know what each other's doing. We're not on the same page as much as we were through the middle part of that year. And I can't help but think that Luke McDonald, as that leader in that back group, a former co-captain, and playing some really good football this year, I can't help but think that the fact that he was doing so much of that communication and organisation back there, and he's found his way out of the side through injury, that's got to be hurting us back there for mine. A lot of that defensive organisation is, we're seeing opposition players getting free and finding space as a result of that disorganisation. Pink's last 3 weeks have been a far cry from his hot spree around the bye period. Melksham just took him to the cleaners, kicked 5 goals. Logue looked mostly lost today, had a couple of nice intercept spoils, but or third man up spoils is probably a better way of phrasing that, but it's certainly not one of his better games. I thought Chom really struggled to impact contests, which, given the Dees didn't go in with a tall forward line, that should give Chom opportunities to go third man up and create some intercept marks. We did not see that. I think a lot of that is down to the way that, or what we're missing with Luke McDonald out of the side. In general, the last 3 games, the defence has regressed, and I think a big part of that change was Luke McDonald. And another thing is just we've had so many players coming in and out of that back line because of injuries and suspensions and whatnot. So yeah, it's tough. I think I should correct myself. I don't think we've had any suspensions in the back line. It has been injuries, but you get my point. Like the inconsistency of the playing group doesn't help either. But I think what we're seeing here is Luke McDonald plays a really important kind of hard to discern role from the sidelines. But I think if you spoke to that defensive 7 group, like Hardiman, like Pink, Chom, Logue, etc., and then obviously the more attacking options like Daniel and McKercher, I think that Luke McDonald plays a really crucial role in that. So, look, hopefully he's able to get back soon. Hopefully he's able to, pass on that knowledge and skills over the next couple of years. Someone like Jackson Archer, who unfortunately is going to miss the rest of the year with injury, he could play a similar kind of role to Luke McDonald in the future. Similar kind of size, different players, but would find themselves on similar types of players. So what you'd want to see is Luke McDonald passing on that knowledge and skills to someone else. But at the moment, what we're seeing is a disorganised backline, and we can't afford to be disorganised because oftentimes our defensive work through the midfield is not amazing, and we're seeing the result and the impact of that at the moment. So that's something that I'm hoping to see improve. It was really good through through that middle part of the year or around the bye period, but the last 3 or 4 weeks it's really dropped off, which is not ideal, obviously. Something else that I thought was worth mentioning, I was just thinking about our development and how disappointed I was that we weren't able to get across the line in this game. And I pondered and wondered to myself who that played today in this Melbourne game is a definite part of our future, and how many players are there in that bracket, because that sort of tells you a little bit about how our rebuild's going and how our development's going, and what the turnover of players and core group is look like. Because sure, you're not going to have 30 core group players that you're like, yes, these are all amazing players, but what you do need is a good solid group of players that you go, yep, they are in our best 22 when fit every single time, and they're here for the next several years. So I think that of the players that played this game, I've got 10 here that I think are definitely a part of the future in some way. Obviously, future is up to interpretation in terms of how far away that is and how many years that is. But in general, I think Harry Sheasel, no complaints there. Tom Powell, the last couple of years, has shown that he is going to be an important midfielder for us. McKercher, no worries. Paul Curtis, no worries. Cam Xerri, signed him long term, so he has to be. Same with Simpkin, same with Xerri. And then Finn O'Sullivan, I think I've seen enough from him this year that I'm confident that he's going to be a long-term piece. You'd hope so as a high draft pick, but I think I've seen enough. I've also seen enough from Will Dawson. Asterisk, maybe I'd like to see it for one more week, but I definitely think he's part of the future. And then Charlie Comben, if he can stay injury-free, is a part of the future. There's my 10. You could maybe make an argument that someone like Caleb Daniel, he's here for the future, but how much of that future is he here for? We could have that discussion, but I think in general that's what we're looking at. Then I think of those that were injured, I've got Wardlaw, LDU, and Larkey that are a part of our future. So there's 13. There are obviously some fringe ones that, Daniel's a fringe one, but big picture though, I think that highlights that the build that's taking place here, we're not quite there yet. We don't yet have enough of those core players that we are committed to and we know are going to be here long term. Players like Will Phillips and Finbar Maley and Bailey Scott, Cooper Harvey, these players that we're just not sure about, they're important to have in the side because you've got to find out. And then we've got those players that are there to keep us competitive at the moment, like Jack Darling and Luke Parker. These types, you could say the same probably about Griffin Logue now at this point. But there's still work to do for us, is what I guess I'm trying to say here for that rebuild. And when you don't win a game against a relatively experienced midfield or Melbourne group, you can. I guess I try and reconcile that with the fact that we're still creating this list. It's been such a long time, and we're nearly there with that core group. But at the end of the day, it takes a long time to turn over a list in AFL football. The nature of a system that uses the draft as heavily as AFL does. And I know it feels like it's been forever. I know other teams have, you look at Hawthorn and they've regenerated so quickly, but our list was in such a bad spot. I think the fact that we've now got 12 or 13 players that are definitely part of our future if we want them to be is positive, but I do think that gives us some context for where we're at and where we're going. And I guess the last thing I want to touch on was this was just a game we simply had to win. I'm a pretty... Maybe I'm not an optimist, but I'm pretty positive. I try to see the positives in things. I think if you're a North Melbourne fan, and all you're doing is worrying about the bad things, the last 5 years must have just been hell. You've got to try and find some positives, and I think I've been doing that for the most part. But this game really hurt just because it was such an opportunity. We would have been finishing the round in 14th had we won. And only 2 points below Essendon and Carlton. Instead, we're still 16th. We're only 2 points clear of Richmond now in 17th because they had a win against a deplorable Essendon on the weekend. And it's just a deflating moment for the playing group and for the fans. Expectations were higher coming in on the back of beating Melbourne earlier in the year. The expectation ultimately means that you're going to be disappointed if you don't win. We've still got some more winnable games coming up. We play Richmond again. We've got the Swans next week. We're going to play St Kilda. There are games that we can win here and hopefully bring some positivity. before the year is out, but this is definitely an opportunity missed. I feel like I've said that a few times now, and this alongside with the Hawks game from a fortnight ago, it's unfortunately definitely a step backwards, and not what we want within this. What I was hoping would be maybe the last year of our bottom out period as we start to move up the ladder. We've got to win games like this if that's going to be the case. All right, around Arden Street, last segment, and not a lot to talk about here. The VFL had a bye. I cannot get my head around how there's so many byes in the VFL, but nothing to talk about there, unfortunately. So we just look ahead to next week, and it is, like I mentioned, against the Swans. It is Saturday, July 19 at the SCG, 4:15 p.m. So that Twilight Saturday fixture will no doubt get Jared Healy commentating for us again, which will make me want to turn the TV off. But in any case, yeah, that's what we've got. Sydney are playing some better football than they were earlier in the year. Not amazing, but better. But at the SCG, I think they are going to be a tough matchup. You'd love to get two of LDU, Larkey, and Wardlaw back. I mean, you'd love three, but I think if you got two of them back, you'd go in with some confidence. Larkey, I think, is super important, and then if you get Wardlaw or LDU back, obviously LDU would be the one I'd choose of those two. But I think if we could get them back, you'd go in a little bit happier with our team balance. I certainly hope we're going to bring some footwear that's appropriate for slippery conditions. We didn't against the Hawks a couple of weeks ago. We know the SCG service sucks, so let's plan for it. Let's not get caught out and be slipping over all the time. It's not how we want to go. And yeah, I think ultimately sort of my expectations shift back to we need to compete. I do not expect to win this game, but I absolutely expect us to be in the game at three-quarter time. And I absolutely expect us to make better use of the opportunities that we create in this game. We've got now 6 games left, including this Sydney Swans game. It is super important that we start taking advantage of some of these, these winnable games. I'd love to win 2 more before the end of the year. We should have won this one, and I would have said 3 then. But I'd love to win, beat Richmond again, and then win against the Swans or against the Saints. Like they're the types of games that I would hope that we can win. We should win, and we should be at least challenging at this point. So I guess to finish the year on 6.5 wins based on where we're at, I think would be solid. But like I said, it's time for us to start doing it, and against the Swans, that's what I hope we do. So an interesting game coming up, an interesting time to be a North Melbourne fan. My attention probably now is starting to turn towards the end of the season and what that might look like in terms of our list spots and who's going to get a contract and what does the trade and draft period look like for us. We know that we don't have that first round draft pick based on the Whitlock trade at the end of last year, or the trade that gave us access to Matt Whitlock. So an interesting time coming up to the end of the year. But yeah, we'll look ahead to the Sydney game first next, I guess. Thank you so much for listening. I'm sorry if you had to watch that game. I didn't love it. It was probably one of the games that I enjoyed least from the year just based on expectation. But hopefully we can bounce back stronger against the Swans next week. I hope you have a fantastic week. I'm halfway through my school holidays now, so I'm going to have another week at home with my son. Try to find some R&R time and try not to think about North Melbourne too much before Saturday. And I'll speak to you probably Sunday in a week's time. Go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at North Pod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.